Welcome to the Sharkpreneur podcast with Kevin Harrington and Seth Greene. Kevin Harrington is the inventor of the infomercial, one of the original sharks from the hit TV show Shark Tank, and has generated over $5 billion in TV and digital direct response sales. Seth Greene is the world's first trusted authority on cutting-edge direct response marketing, a best-selling author, and the only 3-time Marketer of the Year nominee. On the podcast, Kevin and Seth interview sharkpreneurs who share straight talk on what it takes to explode your business.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com. Welcome to the podcast. This is your host, Seth Greene, and today I've got the good fortune to be with Pete Sacco, who is up to many different things, including the PTS Data Center Solutions and author of Living in Bliss, which we're going to talk about. Pete, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Seth. It's an honor to be on your show.
All right, so let's go back. I appreciate that. Let's go back in time. How did you get started?
So my background was as an electrical engineer, right? And way back in the day, I'm proud to say I'm 58 years old, but the little girls over my left shoulder are not my granddaughters. Those are my daughters. So I have the good fortune of having 7, 5, and 3-year-old daughters, but also a 37-year-old son and 12, 9, and 2-year-old grandchildren. So
wow,
I'm that guy. But back in the day, during the first 2 Gulf Wars, I was in the military industry. I designed power supplies. So my background was an electrical engineer. Electrical engineering in the data center, in the power supply industry led to UPSs, which led to the data center. And you might have heard AI is a thing right now. And so, it's keeping, I started PTS, some 30 years ago, back in 1997 as a specialist specializing in that time. It was people who were building computer rooms. Remember when everybody had computers under their desk? Now all of a sudden we're building and enabling the PTS is a $100 million company that specializes in the design, build of the construction of data centers that are founding the AI.
That is absolutely incredible. I'm sure the longer version of that story could probably fill a book somewhere if it hasn't already.
Indeed.
All right. So tell us about before we get into the book, tell me a little bit about some of the lessons you learned along the way of building such a large and successful company.
Yeah, it goes in, everything is plateaus, right? You hit different levels of there, and your organization has to grow commensurate with that. And unfortunately, not always the same people that you have from the beginning are the people who are going to help the different levels of growth. I wish I had to say that I had somebody that explained that all to me, but it was been a lot there. I would say a foundation of surround yourself with people who can answer the questions when the hard questions come up was foundational. My dad was an entrepreneur. My ex-father-in-law owned a large trucking company. Both of them were fundamental to me as sounding boards as to how to grow the business. But outside of that, I would argue that immersing yourself in communities. Dan Buettner from the Blue Zone says that's important for ourselves, but I would say it's also important for us in the business world. So I've been a foundational member in places like Vistage and Strategic Coach. I'm part of Peter Diamandis' Abundance 360 community today that I'm, as much a venture capitalist as I am a CEO. And so you have to immerse yourself in the communities. I would say that's a quick takeaway that is helpful.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, what inspired you to write the book?
So, it was interesting. It's unfortunate for humankind, but we have to hit a low point. And thank God my low point wasn't as low as other people's, right? But we hit our low. And I remember the day that, the doctor, I wasn't feeling good, and I went to the doctor, and she handed a whole bunch of medication. This was maybe the ripe old age of 39 years old. Now I played football, right, at a high level. And so I was a big dude, right? 360 pounds. But unhappily married and a whole bunch of things. And she's handing me medication. And I realized at that moment when I took stock of my life that I was the architect of both everything good and everything bad in my life. And that success, because I was always successful in the business world. I was born of entrepreneurs, and so it was in my blood, but I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't happy with everything that I was doing. And so, to me, with success without personal fulfillment is just failure in disguise, right? Because you can't thrive as a human being in that. And so for me, that was my low. And I created a framework at that point, which later became commit, learn, and do. And I decided to do a whole bunch of other things in changing my life, not the least of which was resulting in this swarthy 196 pound that you see in front of you. But again, so the book is Living in Bliss, Achieve a Balanced Existence of Body, Mind, and Spirit. It was really the cathartic tale of my life, of how I decided to do something about this. And first was to get healthy, and second was to change my mind. And I was happy to discover along the way that it's even plausible, right? We have neuroplasticity and neurogenesis and epigenetics, and I was able to reframe the way I think. And then finally, I discovered spirit along the way. And having grown up Catholic, I discovered that religion doesn't have a lot to do with spirituality, right? Again, an homage to Dan Buettner. I loved his definition: a belief in something far greater than ourselves. And that leaves a lot open to interpretation, and I'm comfortable with that.
Awesome. And that is, I know the longer version is in the book. So let's talk about what some of the specific practices you use to
Yeah.
transform yourself and that you're sharing today.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's skip. There's a very tight bond between mind and body. You really can't do justice to one without doing justice to both. And one of the reasons that weight loss never sticks with people is they haven't changed this guy up here, and that's a little bit harder. But I could tell you what wasn't for me. It wasn't just having to figure out the willpower to do this. It was really personal satisfaction. What it really caused me to do was to go back and first identify, in a very Dan Sullivan kind of way, right? The very well-known guy who wrote Who Not How and The Gap and the Gain. I've gotten to know Dan over the years, but the one real important lesson was, what am I really good at? I call them in my book my superpowers. And when I discovered I had five, right, I was happy with that. And by the way, a good test of your superpowers, one, yeah, you could use the Clifton Strength Index. That's a very strategic coach kind of thing, and it will tell you that. I would think it helps if you're a little bit more introspective about it and go back and look at the stories of your youth. And you're going to find those stories that kick out to you most readily are somehow tied to what you really enjoy doing and gives you great happiness and satisfaction. And those are your strengths in disguise. And so finding that was really critical for me. And then much longer establishing what were my core values. Who did I want to become? And, from where I was. And then the rest of it is a tactical. How do I build daily habits across mind and body in order to keep marching in that direction, meaning create a mindset to do that. And then, every now and then I find myself off the path. And it either means that my core values are wrong, not very likely, or that I'm either actively or inactively wasting time by directing myself off my path. But look, sometimes we dally off the path, but it's good to know that you could always walk back on the path. So discovering my superpowers was probably fundamental to getting me on track.
That makes a lot of sense. How have they evolved since then?
Yeah, core values, I think in general, evolve less. I'd say your superpowers are when you are with you from the beginning. I believe that we are an amalgam, not just our prefrontal cortex, right? The part of our brain, the newest part of our brain, our executive function, if you will, that's formed between 0 and 25. We're actually far more complex than that in layers of mind. But when we're in that creation mode, we are layered with certain things that are imbued into us. And then in a very Dan Sullivan way, stick to what you're good at. If you're a great dancer, stop trying to sing, right? But if you're a great singer, stop trying to dance, right? And so when I discovered those things for me, I realized that, look, to be happy, all I have to do that. I would say another one, happy is an important one for me, because happy, you can't have happy without sad. There's got to be a balance in life. However, I have created an equation, if you will. Sorry, I'm an engineer by trade, right? So everything has to be an equation. And so it started with reading Jonathan Haidt's book, Happiness Hypothesis. And he wrote, I think he's a Harvard psychologist. I'm sorry, Jonathan, out there, if I got that wrong. But he wrote a happiness is your set point plus your conditions plus your voluntary acts. I kind of expanded that to say, look, your voluntary acts, what you do every day, should be incommensurate with what your strengths are. But I'm going to add two more. I'm going to add one, we need to find ways to introduce moments of awe and wonder into our everyday life and not let them happen by chance. We all know that. Anybody who's ever seen the birth of their child or seen, the that great movie that your hair stands up, or seen a sunset or anything majestic like that. And we feel that. We feel connected and we feel inspired. But why wait? Why wait for that? Find ways to manifest that in your life on a regular. But here's the real tough one, expectations. So for me, happiness is all of those things cumulatively minus expectations. I've come to realize I expect way too much of myself. I expect way too much that the world is going to cater to my way of thinking. And worse, I expect way too much of others, unfortunately, especially those that I love the most. And so, in a very Buddha kind of way, I've worked hard to reduce my expectations, or as Buddha would say, suffering, in order to give myself satisfaction and fulfillment.
That's incredible. How has this all affected your work at PTS?
Yeah, I mean, it's a night and day. It's funny. I like to say that, when I made that commitment to myself, that commit, learn, and do framework, I remember the day that I went down by my parents and I said, look, there's got to be changes in my life. I'm going to get healthy because if I don't have my health, two, I'm going to get divorced. I convinced my then wife, we're not good for each other for a long time, right? I'm going to get married again. I don't know who it is, but I'm getting married. I'm going to have children with that woman. She doesn't know it yet, but we're going to have children. And I'm going to build a relationship with my then estranged son. And then five, I'm going to figure out what happiness is. And if I can make myself happy, I'm going to teach others to do it. So if you'd have known me 30 years ago, you'd have seen a completely different person, right? The transformation in me for anybody who's known me then and now is profound and for the better. And I don't mean that to say a pat on the back, though I am proud of myself for the things that I've accomplished in my life and all yet that I will accomplishment. But my mindset today is completely different. I accept reality for what reality is, right? I have very little control over the events of my life. And I'll never forget that in the throes of my deepest dives, I discovered a cognitive behavioral therapist who's now retired. But he told me one thing that stuck with me forever. Do not make the events of your life, which you have little control over, your problems. The one are not the same. And so the answer is, I don't care if you're old, if you're young, we have the capacity for change, and it has nothing to do with willpower. It has everything to believe that change is possible.
Well, that is incredible. And your time is incredibly valuable. We greatly appreciate you spending some of it with us. For our folks watching or listening, where can they go to get the book and anything that comes with the book? And then, hey, who's an ideal client for PTS?
Yeah, great. So I'm long in the process right now of establishing a personal brand about PeteSacco.com. It's PeteSacco.com. There is where the book is available on Amazon and Audible and all of that. If you want an author signed copy, you can go to the Pete Sacco website and we can get you that. We have a bunch of other tools that I'm starting to make available, to other things. One of the nice things that I built, since I spent so much time doing the research for the book, I built a beautiful GPT, for those in the AI world, around it, and all the research and all the books and all of the things that I've read over time. And then I created, using HeyGen, a digital avatar, so you could actually query the GPT questions about body, mind, and spirit, and what are my exercise routines, what are my mental routines, what are my habits, and you could ask it and I will answer it for you. So that's a cute little tool that we put together. And I'm building a whole masterclass around how to manifest these changes in your life, how to build core values, how to identify your strengths, how to identify and find fulfillment in your life. So all of that's there. Ideal client, it depends, right? If we're talking people who are looking for personal transformation, I do a lot of speaking outside. I got a TEDx talk coming up about how we need to stop looking at AI as a rival and look at it as a mirror by which is going to allow us to become more human. I'm the anti-Terminator guy, Seth. I am fully baked that no technology has ever destroyed mankind before. This is not the technology to do it. It is the one that is going to finally lead to, a better society. But the idea is out there. But if you do need to build a data center, God love you, I could think of nobody better than PTS Data Center Solutions.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for watching or listening. We'll see you or talk to you next time.
Why do so many businesses struggle while others seem to explode overnight? Do you wish you had the secret to this type of exponential growth? Now, I've scaled more than 20 businesses to over $100 million, and it's not just luck. In my new book with Mark Tim, Mentor to Millions, you'll learn the repeatable framework I use in all my business ventures for massive success. Order at kevinmentor.com and get over $1,000 in bonuses. Head to kevinmentor.com.